It's my honor to welcome you here tonight to the Visiting Artist Lecture Series and Connective Conversations. This evening is sponsored by the Department of Art and made possible by the University of Oregon Connective Conversations Inside Oregon Art, which is a partnership with the Ford Family Foundation's Visual Art Program, Curators and Critics, Tours and Lectures. How's that for an epic title for something? The Ford Family Foundation sponsors a visual arts program with twin goals, and one is to accelerate and enhance the quality of artistic endeavor and bodies of work of mid-career Oregon visual artists through supporting their exploration, conceptualization, production, exhibition, and documentation of new work. The second one is to improve Oregon's visual art psychology. There are many programs that we're probably familiar with that the Ford Family Foundation supports, including significant artist fellowships that are awarded annually. There are Oregon Career Artist grants that are given to assist with a wide variety of projects that artists might have opportunities for. And there's also support for capital improvement projects for nonprofit arts organizations. This endeavor is also one that has been sponsored, and these date back to 2010. And so it's my pleasure to welcome Michael Garling here tonight as one of the ongoing visitors that we've had in the series of distinguished guests that have come to Oregon. Michael was appointed the James W. Alsdorf Chief Curator of the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago in 2011. And since he's been there, he's organized a number of significant exhibitions, including Pandora's Box, Joseph Cornell Unlocks the MCA Collection, The Language of Less, Then and Now, which is inspired by MCA's rich holdings of minimalist and post-minimalist work of the 60s and 70s, the work of Canadian conceptual artist Andrew Ian Baxter, and Think First, Shoot Later, photographs from the MCA collection addressing the premeditated, systematic, and staged character of much of photography since 1960. His latest accomplishment at MCA is the current exhibition, Isa Genkin, a retrospective, which is on view through the summer, and I hope to get to as I pass through the Midwest. Michael's illustrious resume includes previous appointments at the Seattle Art Museum as Bishop, as the John and Mary Shirley Curator of Modern and Contemporary Art, and prior to that, he was the Associate Curator of the Museum of Contemporary Art, MoCA, in LA. He received his BA in Art History from Stanford and his MA and PhD in Architectural History from the University of California at Santa Barbara. Michael frequently serves as a panelist, lecturer, and guest curator, and contributes many essays on art, architecture, and design to publications, including entities like Trees, Art Issues, Flash Art, and LA Weekly. So please join me in welcoming Michael Garling to the U of O as he gives us his lecture. Photography shoots itself, the objectification of the photograph from Naomi Jiro Takamatsu and Camille Monroe. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. Make sure I can switch this to the display mode here.
It's a PC, so you're on your own with me. Is this a slideshow?
Okay, great. Yeah, so thanks for coming out. I'm kind of too bad that I'm fighting against the weather out there. It's obviously much more interesting than being indoors, but hopefully I can keep you entertained with lots of pictures this afternoon. This is a talk that I've just started to kind of play around with a little bit. Last year I was invited to give a talk or be part of a symposium actually in Japan. It was a contemporary photography symposium, but primarily about Japanese photography, which I would not say is a specialization of mine. Although right around that time that I was invited to do this, I had come across the work of this great Japanese artist named Jiro Takamatsu. And in particular, is there any way to turn these lights down over here? There we go. Somebody who's actually not a photographer. He's I think, kind of a great example of this current formulation of an artist who works with photographs, which a lot of the artists that I that I've been kind of working with lately would not also consider themselves photographers, even though they're primarily using photographs. He's somebody that was a founding member of the High Red Center, which was this amazing kind of avant-garde group in Japan in the early 1960s. He also was a key member of the Monoha movement later on in the 60s and the 70s, and somebody that was very interested in kind of phenomenology. There's something about his work that very much comes out of or is connected to minimalism, to conceptualism, all those kinds of questioning movements that really were coming up in the 1960s and 70s. And there's this body of work that he made. There were only about 20 or so of these photographs called Photograph of a Photograph that he made in 1972 and 1973. And I love just how casually and irreverently and even kind of destructively in some cases he was treating the photograph in these pictures, and they felt incredibly contemporary to me when I first came upon these. And I came upon them in a great gallery in New York called McCaffrey. And there's a great kind of Irish guy that runs it named Fergus McCaffrey, who has this amazing passion for avant-garde Japanese art. And so if you're ever out in New York, it's a program that's definitely worth checking out. And so he showed these to me, and I saw images like this where there's this photograph that's obviously kind of left in the developing tray. The photograph itself starts to it's less about the documentation than about the photo itself that he's shooting as an object, and that's what was to me so intriguing about these. And so this lecture in Japan really gave me an opportunity to dig into his work a little bit more, also to sort of think about him in context with some of his peers, and then also starting to kind of connect what he's doing and sort of find a certain relevance in what he was doing in the 70s to a lot of the work that I think is really exciting that's being made today with photographs too. Just to give you a little sense of other things that he was making, he made these shadow paintings like this from the 60s all the way up in time until his death in the late 90s, I think is when he died. He also was making minimalist sculptures like this, which as you can see are, again, very kind of essentialist and about materials and about, here you have this cube that's made with concrete and is filled with its own kind of rubble that was caused by carving out the center of it. So somebody that could very easily sort of slip into any kind of dialogues, that were happening in the West at this time, but I think he still, kind of fell off the map. And a lot of the artists that I've kind of put him together with today have also kind of faded from view recently and are kind of being reintroduced. And he's definitely somebody falls into that category with some of these recent shows that have happened. There was a show about Monoha that was in Washington, D.C. and also in Los Angeles. His work is starting to kind of be reintroduced in Europe as well as alongside other artists like the Hutai group. The group that came before him had this big show at the Guggenheim recently, and in exhibitions like one that I had done in Seattle that was about painting in that case. So it's for me, I'm always kind of somebody that's quite interested in the underdogs and kind of look at where people that history has maybe forgotten for one reason or another. But in many cases, these people are hiding in plain sight. I mean, he represented Japan at the Venice Biennale in 1966 or 67, I think it was in Documenta. It was all kinds of high-profile shows like that. So he's not an unknown artist by any means. And so I wanted to show you a couple examples of these photographs of photographs. And you can see, especially with one like this, how just casually he's kind of thrown this print on the ground. And these tend to be prints that he made. They tend to be kind of family photos and very kind of banal. The subject matter of the photos themselves that he's shooting are not terribly important in a way. But he's really kind of emphasizing the materiality of these things. And for me, it's a way of, I think, de-romanticizing the photograph and showing how, the artifact quality, showing that that these things are intentional objects and results of intentional acts, and kind of takes away a certain kind of that sort of spontaneity, or even the romance of the image and kind of getting lost in it, and kind of really sort of cracks that mirror in a way, or that window. So shots like this where he really obscures the image and allows that sheen of the paper to really be and the curl of the paper to be his primary interest. Here too, even just sort of throwing this right on the studio floor, and it's crumpled and creased and has glare kind of going across it. And I mean, one thing that, I'll be curious to see what kind of comments come out after the talk is over, but there are lots of other people that I think you could start to put them into context with, even in Japan itself. I mean, there's some great photos by Daido Moriyama where he too was kind of flashing these pictures with glare so that the image itself was being obscured, and again, that kind of object quality started to come out. But I was especially interested in some of his Takamatsu's Western peers, and not even people that he necessarily knew, and some of them probably didn't know about him either. But I've always been fascinated with these kind of zeitgeists that take place, where some artists working on opposite sides of the world might arrive at a very similar solution at the same time, maybe without even knowledge of one another. One of those people I think that makes for an interesting comparison with Takamatsu is Ken Josephson, and he's somebody too that I think has kind of fallen off the map in some ways in terms of his kind of acknowledgement within the image making world. I mean, somebody that's very kind of dear to the heart of the photo history world, but I think his work now really has a lot to do and a lot to say to contemporary artists. And even, I think, if you start to look at his work against the backdrop of conceptual, minimal, deconstructive, postmodern types of work in other media, photography, video, sculpture, it really holds its own. And he's somebody that I've luckily been able to get to know in Chicago, because he's still alive and well and working in Chicago, has a great sense of humor, has an amazing amount of work still in his studio. And so I was able to go and kind of rifle through work with him not too long ago, and actually was able to add some new pieces to our collection. At our museum, actually, the MCA in Chicago did the last major survey of his work back in the 1980s, and so it's been that long since somebody's been able to really take a good hard look at what he's up to, and I think it's sort of high time that we did that again. But this is one of his real classic images, and one that we were able to buy for the museum. Also not very expensive right now, which is amazing that somebody of his stature there's still great prints out there for not a lot of money. We also were able to pick up this piece too, which again I think really shows again kind of pokes holes in photography in an interesting way, kind of bring this objectification to it, or objectivity maybe I should say. And I think a lot of these artists too, they kind of suggest a nice rupture from a previous generation, kind of maybe this decisive moment type of generation, and are really trying to kind of pull back the curtain and show how many choices and how much there is in terms of framing and manipulation of perception in pictures like this, or also kind of using a lot of humor like this to kind of again deconstruct photographs in a way. And here too, again, you see this sort of Polaroid kind of placed right on top of a female figure, and this kind of push-pull and foreground background that I think he's really playing with. Or this picture too, which I found rummaging through his, some of his prints at his studio, and was able to get this one for the museum. Actually, he gave this one to us as a gift after we bought a couple other ones, which was a really nice thing. But for me, there's just some amazing kind of didactic qualities to this that are great for kind of teaching these concepts about what is captured within that frame of the viewfinder and what's left out at the same time. And I think this picture really shows that act of framing and how subjective photography can be, and how someone like him again is trying to really kind of shake us out of our reverie in that way. Another artist that I've actually, as was mentioned, Terry mentioned, that I've worked with recently, that also is working in this field in an interesting way, is Ian Baxter, who's a Canadian artist. Primarily was working in Vancouver during the 1960s, and then went to Toronto, and now still lives and works in Windsor, Ontario. During a certain period in the 60s, he was working with his wife, Ingrid Baxter, and they called themselves the N.E. Thing Company. And they used to actually drive up and down the I-5 from Vancouver through Seattle, Portland, down here, all the way down to Los Angeles, had an amazing kind of dialogue with artists up and down the West Coast. But he also, I think, took a very irreverent view to photography, would just take pictures like this right out of magazines, like this is probably an image from Art Forum or something like that. Took a picture of this Robert Smithson there, and then stamped it with this red seal, and then wrote ART number 16 on there. And for him, ART was not art, but it was an aesthetically rejected thing. So he often would kind of reject kind of mainstream art, fine art things, and usually would prefer to, like next to these ARTs, he would do ACTs, which are aesthetically plain things, and they tended to be more mundane, like piles of rocks by the side of the road. He would kind of claim as art and kind of reject this highfalutin stuff that was being propagated in the art magazines, even though, of course, he was showing at Cooley Gallery and up in Nova Scotia with all the conceptual artists and everything. And sometimes, like this one, he would claim and reject one of his sources at the same time. So here, too, kind of photographing a photograph in a book with an image of Marcel Duchamp, and we'll put a bunch of schmutz on the picture there, too, probably a reference to the large glass or kind of images of dust and things that Duchamp had done. But Baxter too. I mean, interesting thinking about Takamatsu, thinking about Ken Josephson. Baxter also made this really great kind of self-referential group of photographs where he was taking small-scale Polaroids around in Paris, photographing into a mirror that would reflect some kind of monument in Paris, sort of a beauty spot, so to speak, in Paris, like the Eiffel Tower or the Louvre. This is an image of the Louvre. And then he would take these small Polaroids and lay them on this model next to other kind of beauty spots or moles, on the figure. So lots of kind of wordplay and double entendres. And in this case, he was one of those artists that got access to the large format Polaroid cameras in the late 70s and early 1980s. But he's somebody too that really I think was making amazing work and very well known, especially known in Canada, but really very little known here. And I think his work has so much to say about where we are with contemporary art these days. And so I was able to. This is a show actually that I wanted to do in Seattle. They weren't quite ready for it up there, so I was able to luckily do it in Chicago instead. But still, we really couldn't get this show to travel anywhere else in the U.S., which was too bad. But so he's still a legend in Canada, but kind of a myth down here on the lower half of North America. Another artist that I think is interesting in this way and has really paved the way for the younger generation working today in a very significant way is James Welling. And as Terry mentioned, I organized a show at our museum recently called Think First, Shoot Later that was about kind of conceptual approaches to photography. And it was really inspired by the strength of our collection in that area. Our collection, doesn't really include kind of Cartier-Bresson kind of style photography. It's all, Dusseldorf school kind of going forward. But yet we didn't have anything by James Welling, which seemed like a real lack. So I got in touch with him. He still teaches in Los Angeles. Still has a lot of work in the studio. And came upon this amazing group of works that he made in the early 1970s, like this one, where he's literally just tearing an ad out of magazines and representing it as his own. So even, I think, more radical than Richard Prince photographing a Marlboro ad, Welling just is sort of like, this is a photograph already. Why do I need to do anything else to it? And so these are not very well-known pictures, and they've only just really come to light recently, again, with another recent exhibition on his work that first started at the Cincinnati Art Museum and then went to the Hammer Museum, and then that was it in the U.S. It went off to Switzerland afterwards. So again, an artist that I think deserves to be better known here to a broader public, even though he's really quite legendary among artists, I think, that are working in this way. This is a picture that we were able to bring into our collection that, again, is just an ad kind of torn right out of a magazine and represented as a picture. And he said this really inspired his whole series of works that he made with aluminum foil that looked like rock formations and things like that. But the thing that I like about these pictures and Welling in particular is, again, I think he's really key in kind of bashing down the hierarchy between different types of photographs. So it's not, he doesn't care if it's fine art photography or commercial photography or advertising photography, color, black and white, doesn't care about the process. All of those really are at his disposal, and over the course of his now 40-some year career, he's really worked in all these different ways, and which shows that work kind of in a very equal and equivocal fashion, which I think has really kind of flattened these distinctions. And I think that's really what artists today seem to be quite liberated by it. Another artist that, again, is sort of in the canon but had kind of fallen off the radar a bit until just very recently is Robert Heineken. And again, I think with a lot of these older artists, and of course, and unfortunately, he's no longer with us, but it's usually the younger artists and younger dealers that are kind of rediscovering artists like him. And so there's a great gallery in Los Angeles called Cherry and Martin that I think could really be credited with restarting an interest in his work, and has put together a couple of great shows mixing Heineken's work with younger artists. And now all of a sudden there's a show of Heineken's work at MoMA in New York. Again, the last Heineken show was in the 1980s at our museum in Chicago, so it's been that long since we've had a really in-depth look at his work. But I think here too, you see him thinking about photographs as physical objects, not just as these images that we might get ourselves lost in. And so here you have a kind of a group of works where he's cut apart different images of a female nude, mounted them on wooden blocks, and then you can kind of recombine these. So the image literally is something physical that can be played with and recombined into something quite unusual and very sort of surrealistic. Or this is another work that was in that show, and it's actually in our collection too, where you see him just maybe like Welling, kind of grabbing, cutting, pasting from different sources, combining different types of photography together in one image. Or also, too, a whole series of manipulated magazines that he did. That, again, I think this gallery, Cherry and Martin, really did a great job of resurfacing these, where Heineken often would cut into the pages of these magazines. So as you're turning the pages, you'll start getting strange juxtapositions of imagery and text. And of course, sometimes, too, making these photo transfers onto the pages of other magazines. So you're getting Vietnam pictures and pornography kind of mashed up in one location, which I think is one of the more well-known kind of contributions to the field. And again, too, there's something, a lot of humor in his work. Even this title of this piece, which is Cliché Varie, a play on cliché vert, the kind of glass slide technique in photography. And here too, just sort of cutting, pasting, chopping up these things at will in a way. And it's worth saying that, noticing that you probably already noticed it, that these are all male photographers. There's a certain kind of old-fashioned, sexist, perhaps even kind of, even though I think, Heineken, it could be argued that he was trying to kind of debunk pornography and kind of sexist imagery in a way, but at the same time, it still comes up in his work over and over again. And it's interesting that I think the new generation that's really inherited a lot of this legacy happened to be, I think, female photographers or artists working with photography that have really taken this on and pushed it to a new level, rather than maybe very many male artists. And one of the people that I think has been doing that in a very sustained and really smart way for a long time now, over 10 years, is Ann Collier. And she's somebody that started out working in LA and the Bay Area, and now has been living in New York for a while. I'm working on a retrospective of her work right now that's going to open at Bard College in New York in the end of June, and then we'll come to Chicago in November. But you can see here maybe some of those hints from Takamatsu and Baxter and other people where, again, the photograph, and what you're seeing is, if this was hanging on the wall, you'd see the black background would be part of the image framed, and then sitting in the middle of that image would be this box of photographs here that you can very obviously see that there are many pictures there. And in a way, it's this stack that she can kind of access at will, and the photograph has become kind of this banal object and not just this highly kind of fetishized image in a way. And in her case, there's oftentimes autobiographical content that's sort of laid on top of these things. Images of oceans for her oftentimes represent kind of where her parents' ashes were scattered, and so there's a sense of kind of loss that she often deals with in her work. But she also does a lot of self-portraiture too, and I couldn't help but thinking about this picture when I first saw that Takamatsu image of the photograph in the developing tray. She's done a whole series of images of her own eye in different kind of setups, and in this one where it's in the developing tray, and the tray itself starts to take on a kind of what's the word, kind of physiological quality, where that little corner starts to look like a tear duct almost. But also, I mean, one of the things that I love about this picture, and this is actually going to be the cover of our book that we're doing for our show, is that you know, a lot of her work, I think, teaches us about looking, and it's sort of about visual literacy, and kind of again has this, encourages a certain kind of critical thinking about photography, about the images that circulate around us, you know, at an ever increasing rate. And so these pictures look back at us as we're trying to look at them and kind of decode them in certain ways. And a lot of her work has to do with the business and industry of photography itself. She's made lots of pictures of ads for cameras and how-to books like this one, and you can see just by photographing this with all these kind of post-it notes, you know, she's suggesting that she's kind of devoured this book and learned all of the lessons that she can learn from it. And you'll see maybe as you kind of picked up from a couple of these images of hers, there's always a very cool kind of neutral approach that she has to her pictures. She usually just photographs these objects that are already out in the world. She's not inventing these things on seamless backdrops in a very kind of perfect professional way, almost as if they're product photography. And yet somehow she's able to kind of coax these ironies and these cliches in a way out of these objects that she finds around the world. I mean, she finds them on eBay, she finds them in thrift stores and things like that. She's become quite a connoisseur of photographic ephemera in a way. She's also really interested in how photographs, and again, I think this is maybe a legacy or something she's picked up from James Welling, who actually was one of her teachers, interested in how photographs circulate around the world and in the media. And so not just fine art photography, not just classic photography, but posters done by kind of rock star photographers like Stephen Meisel. I mean, she's very conscious about letting us see that this picture of Madonna has folds in it, as if maybe it was a pullout from a magazine or something sold at a concert in some kind of fan club kind of manner, and also a whole series of images of kind of blonde bombshells from American culture, Marilyn Monroe, Madonna, and oftentimes sort of picking up on these cliches, sort of the blonde bombshell smoking in bed, kind of this post-coital kind of image that again really kind of objectifies the sitter and kind of perpetuates a certain mythology in a way, just as much as this is dependent on this photograph kind of being reproduced over and over and over again and pushed out through the world. So there's a lot of her work deals with album covers, magazines, books, posters, postcards that again use photography as this medium of delivery in a way. And this picture too, I think again really sort of helps us to recognize this object quality and even the true physicality of a photographic print in a way. And again, it's an image of her eye, and the way this thing is being cut by a photo print cutter still has this amazingly visceral quality. I think. I mean, I kind of cringe every time I look at this, even though I've seen it a million times, and I think it's just amazing how she's been able to again kind of coax that bodily response out of a picture that again is so otherwise neutrally handled in a way. And of course, there's references to Buñuel and the Buñuel Dali film where the eye is being cut by the razor blade and things like that. But again, I think an interesting kind of inheritor of this earlier tradition. And then I also wanted to include this picture too, where she loves kind of revealing these sort of sexist cliches too that are in the photographic world, especially in photographic advertisements and things. There's a lot of imagery she's done of camera equipment that just happens to have like female nudes languidly laying behind the objects and things like that. And this is one of a rare couple pictures where she's kind of showing this sort of very phallic, masculine quality of these cameras that also the camera companies are trying to perpetuate too. Some of the other artists that, again, I think that kind of become this new peer group of female artists working with photography in this way that I think again encourages kind of a critical thinking includes Leslie Hewitt, and you can see here a big photograph like this is not hung on the wall, but leans on the wall. The sort of perspective that she's created in the image makes this really look like a three-dimensional object that has actual space and depth to it, and also even these books and the other things that are in the picture, including another photograph up there, are photographed really at 1-to-1 scale. So we're also, again, kind of confronted with this object quality of the photograph and not just lost in the image itself. It was amazing to kind of find pictures like this, too, that are just so similar to the Takamatsu in terms of these images just thrown on her studio floor, photographed from above in this very kind of documentary, kind of offhand way. Or another picture like this, too, where, again, photographs of photographs as well as other objects really become part of her visual style and her visual language. Another young artist that I've started to follow a bit, who I think is doing some really fascinating work, is Xaviera Simmons. This is from a whole group of works that where she's got these female figures that are kind of pulling up their skirts and have all these photographic objects and other kind of signifiers, maybe of personal history or identity, that are kind of hiding underneath these dresses. Here you see kind of Whitney Houston over there and other things. And this is something, you can see this is from 2008, but this is a series that she continues up to the present day. And I've got another one here in a second. Or work like this that obviously, relies on that Ken Josephson example. But here too, she's trying to create some kind of new meaning, I think, in a way, and introduce this scene of these people jumping off this boat onto a placid kind of landscape and start to kind of maybe ask us or force us to kind of make connections between these two different situations. Here's and this last one again was something that we brought into the MCA's collection a couple of years ago, and then we just recently followed it up with this one from this kind of index group, and again where you see this whole kind of ensemble of pictures, again drawn from all kinds of different sources, from art, books, from National Geographic, other kinds of mementos and things like that are in these pictures, and I think they are interesting in how they suggest how one's sort of self-worth and identity and personality and history are oftentimes built up with these photographic references in a way. Another artist that I think sort of fits into this phenomenon in a way is an artist named Marla Pasquale. She's somebody that rifles through all kinds of old photos at antique stores and photo archives and things like that, and pulls out images that she then reuses in oftentimes very sculptural ways, like this one here, where she's taken this little very banal picture of this bird and blown it up quite big, mounted it on plexiglass, and then kind of rammed this lucite rod right through it so that this bird looks like it's perching on that rod. Or this one here too, where she's again blown this image up to enormous scale and kind of ripped it, probably ripped it beforehand, then blew it up to kind of create this effect of a torn picture, even though this is probably over 6 feet tall. So it's really has this amazing scale that starts to look or kind of get into the realm of a Richard Serra leaning up against the wall, or a John McCracken or something like that. And again, kind of breaking that dreamlike gaze maybe that we might otherwise bring to a picture like this. Here's another image by her, as you can see, a very, very recent one. So she continues to find these ways of shaking up photographs and bringing out new potential in them, often in a very sculptural way. So that's a real life-size, or a real rock, I should say, that she's placed in the gallery floor, and then put this photograph of this man on the rock on top of it. And often, most of the time, she mounts these photographs on plexiglass so that they do, again, have a real physical presence in a way. And then she's also done things like this, too, where she just, really kind of violates the integrity of the photograph by folding it, creating these surreal kind of images and deformations of the figures that might appear in the pictures themselves. And one of my kind of typical approaches is just like when I latch on to something, just kind of keep hammering it with examples. So I'm just going to show you a lot of work that I've been seeing lately that kind of seems to fit this mold. It's almost like this, recognizing this pattern that's sort of out there And oftentimes this is how exhibitions develop for me. I start to sort of see something going on in culture and artist studios, and start to see other examples, and it starts to suggest a theme or a movement's too strong of a word, I think, but again, kind of a zeitgeist maybe out there. And there's a great show recently by Collier Shore in New York at 303 Gallery, where she too, I think, was kind of pulling back the curtains a little bit on her photographic practice. And she's somebody that works in the fine art photography world and also in the fashion photography world, and has kind of been able to sort of do both at the same time and bring elements of each to each other field in a way. And so here you see her taking a picture of one of her own images from a fashion magazine, kind of pulling out and framing it in just such a way that you see the gutter on the magazine there, see the folds of the page as it kind of segues into the next picture, so kind of disrupting that view in a way. Or this is one that's maybe a little hard to appreciate here, but she blew this up to, as you can see, 56 inches high. Another shot that she would have done on one of her fashion photo shoots, but it really brings out all the kind of pixelation in the picture that would not have been so visible if this was presented at regular magazine scale. So again, kind of trying to pick apart the mechanics of the photography world in a way. Or even like with this one too, making. Here you see two different kind of photographic prints, again, from her fashion work that she's kind of coiled together and presented on a pedestal in a plexiglass box, so that these become sculptural objects in a way. Another artist that also I've been keeping an eye on, that's doing some exciting work that I think also fits this theme, is Michelle Abeleys, and also a New York-based photographer. But I think she starts to take us a little bit further away from maybe these analog photographs or photographic objects in a way that you might see in Anne Collier or Marla Pasquale, and starts to get to some kind of a very much internet-inflected kind of vision of our photographic world, where there's a whole bombardment of different images from different kinds of spheres coming together in an image, and oftentimes you can't really tell what she is seeing, behind her lens, and what she's introduced that's already been photographed, like over there on the left-hand side, some kind of an advertisement, maybe this rock, perhaps sitting on a table in a newspaper, and then just behind that you actually see a figure that's probably in her setup that she's photographing too. So these foreground, background, different sort of source material become all confused in the single image, and so I think there's something about what she's doing now that again captures this kind of post-internet sort of sensibility in a way. And you can see these are all quite recent pictures. Here's another one too, where again different types of imagery are kind of laid on top of one another. Sometimes even feeling like these things are all just either on a computer screen as files, or maybe slapped down onto some kind of a scanner, and then kind of captured as images and represented. She usually prints these things maybe about half the size of the image you see on the screen, so they're highly saturated, very sort of sexy images in terms of the color and the compositions and things like that. But again, this kind of visual overload that I think is really, really kind of exciting. And then one thing that I wanted to kind of introduce into the mix is an artist that really doesn't. All these artists that I've shown you so far are actually printing these pictures, framing them, putting them on the wall, or in some cases leaning them against the wall. But there's an artist named Camille Henrot that I think is used, working in a similar vocabulary, but kind of to different means. These are stills from a video that she debuted at the Venice Biennale last summer, where again there's a similar idea of kind of pulling back the curtain in a way, kind of looking at the source material, but in this case, the sources and her framing device is the computer screen and kind of computer files, and you can see how she's left this window with a little close arrow there. All these images that she's taking, and then the kind of mashup of background and foreground resulted from a residency she did at the Smithsonian Institution, where she was going into all these different departments, kind of seeing how knowledge is organized, classified, archived, taking pictures of all kinds of different things, from some kind of a strange fruit to kind of images of animals. And it was a real knockout video, something that and it ended up winning the Silver Lion, which is kind of the second place prize for the whole Venice Biennale that year. And is a work that we actually also bought for our museum because we just thought it was so fantastic. One thing I learned in giving a version of this lecture yesterday is that I probably should include an image of the video or some footage of this video. So I'm sorry I don't have that. I've just got some stills today. But some of this idea of files that maybe exist in a stack and that you can kind of rifle through. She was first kind of playing with in sculptural form. Here you can see how all these different kind of classified objects are clustered into this sort of sculptural island in a gallery. But I think she's kind of figured out a much more efficient and kind of streamlined way of dealing with this information overload in these videos. Like here too, you can see these sort of dialogue boxes that are opening up and maybe sometimes metastasizing in a way and getting a little bit out of control. You can see that her style of photography, again, is very similar to maybe Anne Collier's in that it looks like product photography. It's very, professionally done, very neutral in a way, very, very sexy in trying to sell us what's going on in these pictures. But then we're constantly being distracted by these different layers of information that she's introducing over and over again. And here's another shot from that too, where again you see the computer maybe starting to kind of go kind of crazy in this overload of information that we can't quite get a hold on. And I think it's sort of interesting how, again, here a female artist is kind of bringing us sort of full circle to the same territory that maybe somebody like Robert Heineken was working at back in the 60s and the 70s, and yet we're, very firmly, I think, in a picture. It's still like this. It's good worth keeping in mind that these are moving images, there's soundtrack, there's voiceover and other things that bring these things to life. But that this is, very much a 2013, 2014 kind of phenomenon that I think she's bringing us to that I think is really exciting. And so, who knows, maybe there might be an exhibition at some point that might bring all these artists together and kind of look at them as a group. But I think there's definitely something in the air right now, this sort of deconstructive kind of way of looking at photographs that I think feels very relevant, especially the way that photographs are the primary way that people are consuming the world right now. Everybody's got their camera in their hand, they're taking pictures of their food, and they're taking pictures of the lecture I noticed from the back there, and its photographs are the interface that we're using right now. So I think these artists are kind of helping us sort of understand that and look at that and process that in some new and pretty exciting ways. So I'd be very happy to answer questions or field any observations that people might have. Any brave souls out there? Yes?
I was wondering if you had heard Sam Abel talk about his views of artists just taking other people's photography and using them.
Sam Maple? Is the person's name?
I believe it's Sam Abel.
Oh, Sam Abel. No, I don't know about him, but I'm very much aware of that approach of appropriation and things like that. Did you want me to comment on it, or?
Well, he was very critical of it. He felt that it was really not right to do that. That it was taking away from the photographer who did the work.
I guess I have a more liberal kind of view of that, especially considering just how freely these pictures are kind of circulating around in the world, and I think I often will look for some kind of intervention that the next artist is doing to that original picture to bring something new to it. But I think that's what's so shocking about those James Welling pictures, that he was in 1974 so willing to just sort of steal in that way and represent them, and so it is. It's obviously something that's been in the news a lot with Richard Prince, and it's been the subject of all kinds of lawsuits and things like that. In fact, a photographer in Portland yesterday I met after giving a similar talk said that Martha Rosler had stolen one of his pictures and used it as one of her artworks, and he was very conflicted about that. So I can imagine, the artist that made that original picture might have some real proprietary interest in it. But me as a curator, art historian, culture vulture, I'm kind of interested in how these things are being consumed and regurgitated, and that seems more interesting to me than kind of hanging on to that original. Yes?
Well, you mentioned Richard Prince. I think Sam Edel has a connection there because his photo is the one that you've seen in Richard Prince's 3 photographs. That's why Sam Edel was sort of taking issue with that. So, the marble, the famous marble.
Oh, okay.
Sam at the table photo.
Okay.
But I actually want to say that on a different topic. I just think it's interesting you're commenting on all these sort of re-photographs of pictures as prints and objects and sort of tangible things. And meanwhile, photography sort of going the total other direction. Most photos made nowadays don't ever get to get.
That's sort of
on the screen, and that's all it ever happens to them.
Yeah.
And if you're talking about visiting studios and shuffling through drawers and stuff, I don't think that's going to be happening in the foreseeable future. You're going to be looking at a computer screen, looking for all that stuff. That's not really going to exist in this way.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, and it's one reason that I was sort of interested in putting these on-road pictures in there because they're obviously photographs, and there's a certain kind of artistry that she's bringing to taking these pictures, but like you said, they don't ever kind of go out into the world as prints in a way, and even commercial photographers now rarely get tear sheets that their stuff is made for the web and other things. So yeah, I'm curious to see, in a way, some of these people that I've shown, kind of there is maybe a slightly old-fashioned kind of maybe quality in relying on that photo object. So yeah, I'd be curious to see what happens next with that.
Did you ever talk to James Welling about the Prince relationship?
Richard Prince relationship?
Yeah, with his, I'd never seen that Welling piece before, and I just wondered because I know you know him, so I just thought if he'd ever made a comment about obviously the big radical move that Prince made that everyone talked about was the Marlboro Man,
Yeah.
And I just think it's really great to see that Welling did this by just tearing it out of the book or whatever.
Yeah. I think that was one of those situations where they didn't know what the other one was doing.
Right.
And they were on opposite sides of, at that time Welling was in LA, but he was like, David Sally was his roommate and stuff, so who would then go to New York and be kind of part of that scene. So it was like this close from them kind of figuring that out. But yeah, to me it seems like an even more radical gesture.
Sure.
So I was really shocked to find these pictures. Yeah. Anybody else?
I'm curious about the trends. They're kind of move from the images, talk about it as a screen, but as a flat, in a frame on the wall, and then the moments when artists are taking the image and turning it into an object. And I guess I wanted to hear more about thoughts about that moment, what's happening with that impetus to make that kind of movement.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for me, they seem to be different ways of just making us aware of what we're looking at. And sometimes it's this sort of framing device here, or in those other pictures, and I don't know. I think it's so easy for us to just to believe. Still, even with everything that's been written and said, and Photoshop and all that stuff out there, it's still so easy for us to believe what we're looking at. And so I think there's this kind of vigilance that these artists are showing, that we're trying to say, don't trust everything. Use your critical faculties and kind of question what you're. I mean, it's sort of a political kind of urgency to this. I think in a way, question what you're being fed by the media in a way. But at the same time, I mean, I think that a lot of these are really visually kind of satisfying objects as well. So, kind of give you a little dose of the sweet and the sour at the same time. But does that answer Good question. I mean, at least that's what I like with these. You know, I kind of am seduced by them, but I'm also kind of intellectually stimulated and kept kind of, you know, on point at the same time.
There's a very demonstrative nature to a lot of this photography too, I think, especially with Anne Collier. Like, this I haven't seen this video, but there's a sense of the artist is constantly in this position of presenting and then representing and then as a demonstration almost. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, I didn't show some of those, but there are, a lot of times in her work there are arms that kind of enter into the frame that are holding these things, like holding open books, holding pictures, and yeah, that's a good
and
point.
I feel like Hans-Peter Feldman, although he's a whole other generation and European and everything, I think it's different to look at maybe, but I think that's what set him apart in many ways from the German, you know, canon of the photo schools as well, right? Because he just sort of demonstrated like a whole wardrobe of someone's clothes and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah. Or collecting images of a certain subject from all
totally,
sources,
like
putting
total
them in one
typologies, but not in a grandiose way like the Beckers or whoever.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely other bridges that I could have introduced between like that one group, the older group of male photographers, and these artists. You know, the whole pictures generation, of course, is in there.
Yeah.
Somebody like Hans-Peter Feldman is in there, and others. But that's for a longer lecture.
I know.
Yes.
So great that you connected with Ken Josephson, you know, kind of being able to talk to him and see all those images, and particularly those ones that seem to really show this whole new way of using photographs, like computer photographs. So I'm curious about what he knows about this generation of people who have taken that idea and kind of rebirthed it and advanced it in another way.
You know,
Talk about that at all?
I didn't ask him about that, but you make me think that he might be a great person to come and do a gallery talk when we have this Anne Collier show. I mean, that would be amazing to get. And he seems like a really generous guy that would kind of be honored by the fact that some of these ideas are still in circulation or being kind of reused in a different way, and not be sort of jealous or bitter or something like that. So. So I haven't asked him that question, but I think I ought to, and it would be great just to get him in front of our audience in that way.
Yeah.
Take advantage of him being there. Yeah. Anybody else? Great. Well, thank you.